The snow didn't fall. It glared. In the hard daylight, every slope shone like polished bone, every drift throwing bright light into eyes already strained from scanning. The valley was a shallow bowl, pretty from above, fatal from inside. The seal element had dropped into it thinking it was just a fast cut between ridges and the census site. Now it was a textbook kill box with clean geometry, high ground on three sides, a tree line like a dark lip at the far edge, and nothing but wind-carved drifts for cover. The first cracks came from up on the ridge, sharp, spaced, confident, not suppressive fire. Marksmanship. Every shot found a rock edge, a pack strap, an elbow that moved wrong. A heartbeat later, a crew-served gun woke up, its bow stitching across the snow in long, angry lines. It wasn't aiming for bodies so much as movement. The gunner felt the team's attempts to shift positions and punish the impulse the instant it started. Then the mortars began, a dull whomp somewhere beyond the tree line, and the first round slammed into the valley floor with a puff of gray snow. The next landed closer, then closer again, bracketing, walking, deliberate. "Radio's dead," one of the men shouted. He had his handset pressed to his headset, jaw clenched like he could bite signal into existence. "Long range is just static. SAT won't handshake." Their commander, Chief Petty Officer Grant Hale, kept his voice low, because shouting was a waste of oxygen and it didn't change math. He crouched behind a drift that barely covered his shoulders, eyes flicking between the ridge and his men. "Hand signals," he said. "Short moves only. No skylining. Count your mags." He pulled his own magazine, felt the weight. The cold made everything feel heavier, like the metal itself had absorbed winter and refused to give it back. He looked around. 6 operators and a technician team tucked tight in the snow shadows, one man pressed flat with his rifle held like a lifeline. The tech had a hard case in a sling, black against white, an easy target. Hale's mind ran the numbers even as the valley shook from another impact. Ammo, thinning fast. Barrels, heating despite the cold. Time, collapsing. The extraction window wasn't flexible. Their bird couldn't hover in that terrain forever. Fuel and threat lines didn't care that the valley was trying to kill them. They had minutes before the sky closed and the enemy tightened the ring. A groan came from the right. One of his men, Reed, had taken shrapnel in the side and around that bit into his thigh. Blood looked wrong on snow. Too dark. Too loud. "Pressure," Hale said. "Keep him warm. Don't let him sleep." The med kit came out, hands moving in practice calm while chaos snapped around them. Every time Reed tried to shift his weight, the ridge cracked again and snow kicked up at their feet. Across the valley, 2 figures with RPG tubes held steady behind a rock cluster. They weren't firing. They were waiting for a clustered target. The moment someone tried to drag Reed, the moment the tech case got exposed, the moment fear pushed them into a desperate sprint. The enemy wasn't panicking. They were hunting. Hale crawled to his comms man, pressed close to be heard. "Backup plan," he said. "Run it to the micro-ridge. 5 seconds up. Burst transmit. Back down." The micro-ridge was a low swell of rock and snow maybe 30 yards away, barely higher than the drift line but enough to maybe catch a slice of signal over the jammer's noise. Hale pointed. "There. Now." One of the younger operators, Mason, nodded, set his rifle down, and started a low, hard crawl. He moved like they trained, body flat, elbows digging, legs pushing without lifting. For a moment it looked possible. Then the snow around Mason's boots kicked up. Not near his head, near his feet, where the movement was most visible against white. The ridge sniper wasn't aiming at faces. He was tracking footprints, tracking the little bursts of snow thrown by boots that pushed too hard. Mason froze. Another crack. Snow jumped again. Closer. "Is walking him," someone hissed. "Back," Hale said. "Back now." Mason revised, dragging himself into the drift shadow. He made it, but his breathing was loud in Hale's ears. Loud enough to feel. Mortars hit again. Closer. The valley shook. Reed cried out, face pale beneath his scarf. Hale squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, just long enough to feel the pressure of inevitability pressing down. Then something changed. It wasn't obvious at first. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a hero sprinting in. Just 3 shots. Quiet. Spaced. Clean. The first wasn't even noticed until the enemy fire hesitated. Hale looked up in time to see a figure on the far slope jerk backward and collapse behind a rock. Someone with a radio pack, the whip antenna snapping down like a cut reed. The second shot took an RPG gunner the moment he leaned out, tube half-shouldered. The man folded like someone had yanked his strings. The third dropped the machine gun assistant who was feeding the belt. The belt sagged. The gun coughed, then stuttered as the gunner fought to keep it alive alone. Those shots didn't match the team's firing. Hale knew every rhythm his men made under stress. Short bursts, controlled pairs, the occasional fast panic correction. This was different. This was a metronome from somewhere outside the kill box. Friendly fire slackened as heads lifted in disbelief. Enemy fire stuttered as if someone had cut a cable. The mortar impacts paused, then landed wide, off the bracketing pattern, as if the person calling adjustments had suddenly stopped talking. Hale pushed his face over the drift edge and scanned. Sunlit snowfields, wind-carved drifts, the dark tree line, the ridgeline dotted with rocks. No obvious muzzle flash. No silhouette. No smoke. Nothing. Yet the siege was loosening. He caught a movement far out, low profile, sliding along a drift line like a shadow moving across white. A figure that didn't look like one of his men. Too far, too quiet, too deliberate. For a fraction of a second, the figure lifted a hand to adjust a glove, and Hale saw a flash of ink at the wrist, dark lines against pale skin. A tattoo. Earlier, someone had joked about that tattoo. A small, stupid joke in a warm staging hut. Hale had let it slide because it was easier than policing every bit of banter. Now that ink looked like a signature written across the battlefield. Hale's fear didn't vanish. It didn't become courage. It became function. Move, he said, voice calm. On my signal. Read first. Use the pause. He raised his hand, waited as the enemy tried to re-find their rhythm, then chopped it down. They moved in short bursts, dragging Reed through snow that grabbed at sleeves and gear. The crew-served gun tried to re-engage, but the gunner was alone and the belt feed was sloppy. The ridge crack came again, but not with the same confidence. The Overwatch was searching for a shooter that wasn't there. And somewhere, that unseen figure kept applying pressure like a lever to the enemy's spine. Minutes later, in rotor wash that flung snow into the air like a white storm, Hale stood at a wind-blasted landing zone. The bird's engines roared. The team loaded fast, faces tight, hands numb. Reed was strapped in, alive. Then Hale saw her. She stood a few yards off the ramp, quiet, sleeves down, gear dusted with snow. Her face was calm in a way that didn't look like bravado. It looked like someone who had already spent their fee earlier and refused to borrow more. Hale walked toward her. No ceremony, no speech, just a slow, deliberate lifting of his hand. He saluted. For a moment, even the helicopter's roar felt distant. And the mystery of who she was, what that tattoo meant, hung in the cold air like a question the snow refused to answer. Hours earlier, the world had seemed simpler. The forward staging post sat near mountain pass, half buried in snowbanks that had been carved into walls by shovels and wind. The sun poured over the ridgeline and turned the snowfield into a sheet of light. Men squinted, pulled goggles down, checked straps and buckles with hands already stiff from cold. Inside the staging hut, the air smelled of heater fuel, sweat, and old wood. It was the kind of place that made everyone talk a little more just to prove they were comfortable. Hale stood over a map on a folding table, gloved finger tracing the route to a high-altitude sensor node, an ugly little installation that listened to the world and wrote down what it heard. Tech teams pulling the data module, he said. We escort in, escort out. Weather windows tight. Intel says light resistance at most. Light resistance, someone muttered, the way professionals did when they didn't trust anyone's optimism. The tech lead, a lean man with tired eyes, nodded and tapped the hard case. We swapped the module, verify integrity, and we're gone. Then the door opened and the quiet one stepped in. She wasn't dramatic about it. No swagger, no announcement, just a figure in cold weather gear, shoulders squared, eyes alert in a way that suggested she noticed things without trying to be seen noticing. Attached specialist, the liaison said behind her. Precision shooter and Recon enabler. Last-minute ad. Hale's first reaction was irritation. Not at her personally, at the change. At unknown variables. At the fact that he'd planned his team and now someone new was being stitched into the pattern. "What's your name?" he asked. She gave it, low and simple. A name that didn't try to sound like a legend. Then she stepped aside and started checking her kit with methodical hands. She kept her sleeves down. But when she checked her watch, just a quick glance, ink showed at the edge of her glove, dark lines, tight angles. Not a decorative flourish. Something structured. One of the men, half bored and half nervous, let his mouth run. "What is that?" "A tourist map," he said with a grin. "Looks ambitious." A couple of laughs. Not cruel, not fully kind either, more like the habitual testing of a newcomer. The quiet specialist didn't react. No glare, no insult. She simply tugged her glove tight over the ink and went back to her kit. Hale watched, taking measure, not offended, not eager to impress, just silent. Good leaders valued calm, but Hale valued known calm. The kind he'd earned alongside his men. Outsiders could be skilled, sure, but skill without familiarity could become friction when things went sideways. He cleared his throat. "All right, terrain." He pointed to the map, a valley approach that cut the time in half, and a longer ridgeline route that offered better cover but ate daylight and fuel. Daytime in snow had its own cruel rules. Visibility went both ways. You could see forever, and so could the people trying to kill you. "We go valley," Hale decided. "Faster. We'll be in and out before anyone knows we're there." The quiet specialist didn't argue. She leaned in, eyes scanning contour lines and the texture of the terrain. Hale noticed she didn't stare at the obvious routes. She studied the spaces between them. Wind-sculpted drift lines, cornice shadows, a narrow gully marked by a thin blue line that most would ignore because it looked like a dead end. Outside, she moved differently than the others. Small habits. She kept metal from touching skin. She breathed slow, not because she was trying to look calm, but because fast breath turned into visible vapor, tiny flags in cold air. She checked her optic and wiped it with a strip of cloth kept inside her jacket to keep it warm and dry. She swapped a battery early, not waiting for it to die in the cold. Hale saw competence. He still felt distance. As they stepped off, the radio net crackled. Just a brief hiccup. A hiss of interference that came and went. "Hear that?" someone asked. "Happens out here," Hale said, dismissing it. "Keep moving." The quiet specialist's head turned slightly toward a rock outcrop up ahead. Not a dramatic stay, just a note made without writing. They moved through the pass, snow crunching beneath boots. The world was silent except for gear clinks and wind. What struck Hale, though, was what they didn't see. No civilian tracks, no shepherd trails, no random movement that usually left patterns in snow. The approach route felt clean, as if the mountain had been swept. The quiet specialist glanced up once, eyes narrowing at a faint glint far above. Could have been ice, could have been glass. She changed how she walked. Not faster, not slower, just irregular, no predictable cadence, no easy rhythm for a watcher to time shots. The team reached the sensor site perimeter, a small cluster of equipment half hidden behind rock and snow, with a mast that rose like a thin finger into the sky. The tech lead got to work, pulling panels and swapping the data module with hands that shook from cold. "In and out," Hale reminded. "We don't linger." The quiet specialist circled wider than the others, scanning. Then she stopped near a drift that looked untouched. She knelt, brushed away snow with the side of her glove, and revealed a thin wire half-buried, leading toward a rock fin. Her eyes lifted, following the line. A concealed antenna. Homemade. Purposeful. Not part of the sensor node. Not friendly. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her discovery like a trophy. She walked back to Hale, leaned in so only he could hear. "We're being shaped," she said. "That's a jammer-line. It's placed to blind the valley route." Hale frowned. "You sure?" She nodded once. We take the ridgeline out, or we disable it before we move. Hale looked at the tech case, looked at the sky, looked at the snowfields that would turn their silhouettes into targets. He didn't like changing plan under a ticking clock, but he didn't like surprises even more. He opened his mouth to respond, and the first mortar landed. The first round hit the snow 20 yards from the sensor node and sent a gray bloom into the air. Not random, not warning. It was a marker. The second landed closer to the valley approach, as if guiding them. The third hit between two rock clusters, forcing the team to choose, stay and be bracketed, or run where the enemy wanted them. Hale barked orders, but the radio net turned into static. "Jam!" the comms man shouted. Pounding the handset like that would help. Primary's dead. Backup's dead. Hand signals took over, arms chopping, fingers pointing, heads nodding. Everything slowed, because silent communication always did. The enemy opened the geometry like a lesson. A ridgeline shooter cracked, pinning heads down. The crew-served gun began cutting off lateral movement. Anyone who tried to shift left got stitched. Anyone who tried to shift right got stitched. The only safe direction was down, into open snow. Hale saw it instantly. The kill box wasn't an accident. It was a funnel. A chute. Down. Someone shouted. Move down. It sounded right. It was also exactly what the enemy expected. A round snapped overhead. Hale pressed into snow that burned cold against his cheek. "Stay low," he said. "Short moves. Use the drifts." But drifts were thin, and bright daylight made even thin movement visible. The constraints stacked quickly, like weights thrown onto a drowning man. High ground dominated. They had little cover. Any sprint drew fire. Crawling was slow, and the snow chewed at gloves, exposing hands to cold that stole dexterity by degrees. Reed took a hit when he tried to pivot, thigh inside. Blood darkened the snow and made him easier to track. Weather threatened the sky. The extraction window narrowed. Optics fogged from exertion. Batteries drained faster in the cold. Barrels heated from sustained fire despite the winter air. And comms were dead. No support. No quick reinforcement. No easy call to shift the world in their favor. Hale tried to assess the enemy's intent through behavior. A simple ambush would have thrown everything at them immediately. RPGs, volleys, chaos. But the RPG teams held shots. They were waiting for the tech and the hard case to be exposed. They didn't just want buddies. They wanted something. The quiet specialist, still moving, still scanning, saw it too. Her gaze tracked toward the rock fin where the wire led. She could almost feel the jammer's invisible hand pressing against their radios. She crawled to Hale, close enough that her breath didn't show much. "Jammer's controlling this," she said. "They want us isolated. Either they grab the module or they film us getting wiped." Hale's jaw tightened. Filmed. Propaganda. Proof. It fit the discipline. The timing. The restraint. "We can't split," Hale said. "Not under this." She didn't argue. She just looked at the terrain again. The dead ground gully she'd studied earlier. The cornice shadows most would avoid. Then mortar shrapnel peppered their drift. Snow exploded. Reed screamed. Someone swore. The drift that had been their cover became a fragile suggestion. Staying wasn't just dangerous now. Staying was slow death. The quiet specialist's decision wasn't dramatic. She moved when the squad was forced to reposition, slipping into a fold in the terrain that looked like a dead end, an ugly scoop of snow and rock that no one would choose unless they had a reason. Hale, busy dragging Reed and directing fire, glanced up and didn't see her. For a moment he assumed she'd fallen back, or gotten pinned, or made a mistake. A teammate muttered through clenched teeth, "Shouldn't have laughed at that tattoo." Regret tasted bitter in Hale's mouth, because it implied guilt, and guilt was a luxury in a kill box. He focused on keeping his people alive. Then a small buzz cut through the air. A drone, not the big kind, but enough, a small eye in the sky, searching for movement patterns. The enemy wasn't just firing. They were tracking. The quiet specialist was now fully isolated. No comms, no line of sight, only the distant rhythm of muzzle flashes and mortar thumps, and the knowledge that every minute was a closing fist. She disappeared into the snow terrain like she belonged to it. And down in the bowl, Hale's unit held on, watching their ammo count drop and their time evaporate, unaware that the fight's center of gravity had just moved. The world became a narrow strip of snow under her chest and a wide sky above her. She dropped into dead ground, wind-carved gully lines that ran like scars beneath the ridgeline. From above, the gully was invisible. From inside it, the valley's chaos was a distant roar. She moved slow to avoid sloughing snow. A small slide could glitter in sunlight and betray her position. She timed her motion to sound. When mortars thumped, she crawled. When the valley went briefly quiet, she froze. Breath control mattered. Not for calm, for concealment. She kept her exhale low into her scarf, minimizing visible vapor. She avoided letting metal touch skin. She checked her optic, wiped it with warmth-preserved cloth, and kept the battery close to her body when she could. The jammer's location became clearer as she advanced. A concealed mast near a rock fin, aligned perfectly to blind the valley route. It was clever, high enough for line of sight, hidden enough to avoid casual detection. It would likely be watched, possibly trapped. She resisted the urge to rush it. The fastest solution wasn't always the safest, and the safest wasn't always the highest payoff. The drone buzzed overhead once, a searching sound. She pressed into the gully wall and didn't move. The drone passed, unable to see into the dead ground. A near failure came when her optic fogged briefly, warmth from her body meeting cold glass. For a moment, the world blurred. She could wait and risk losing time, or she could press on with a less precise sight picture. She chose function. She warmed the optic against her jacket, held it there just long enough, then moved. Ahead lay the traverse beneath a cornice line, the impossible route. It was exposed in a way that made other people dismiss it instantly. A wrong step could send her sliding into open snow where a watcher would turn her into a lesson. A hard sound could trigger a small avalanche. The cornice hung above like a threat you couldn't negotiate with. She went anyway, because the enemy had built a funnel based on what most people would do. She moved with shallow steps, distributing weight, using the rock face to break her outline. The cold bit into her fingers even through gloves, but she didn't let her hands shake. Not because she wasn't afraid, because fear didn't get to drive. A rock edge scraped her wrist. The fabric snagged. She hissed silently and ducked behind a bulge of stone to check the cut. For a moment, she pulled her sleeve up. The tattoo was visible now in the cold daylight, dark lines and coordinates, a tight grid with a small mark at a specific point. Not art, not decoration, a location, a memory pinned in ink so it could never drift. She wrapped her wrist, pulled the sleeve back down, and kept moving. When she reached the Overwatch pocket, a shallow depression in snow tucked behind rock, she could see the battlefield like a diagram. Below, Hale's team pinned behind drifts, Reed bleeding, the tech case clutched close. Across, the enemy's structure, a radio operator with a pack, tucked behind rocks near the jammer mast. A spotter team with glass, one man scanning, one marking. A mortar lead using a reference point, rock, tree line edge, to walk rounds with calm adjustments. RPG teams waiting for clustered movement. A crew serve gun anchoring the kill box. And deeper, protected, a field commander directing the timing, not wasting resources, shaping the fight into a story they could film. She realized the siege wasn't open-ended. It was timed. A window. The enemy wanted the data module and a daylight victory before the extraction could arrive. Proof that even elite operators could be trapped and broken in snow-bright day. She could disable the jammer, or she could break the enemy's spine. She chose the higher payoff. Prone in the snow depression, she built a stable platform, packed snow under her elbows, controlled her breathing until it slowed to something precise. She mapped targets by priority. Force multipliers first, then leaders, then Overwatch. She watched the cadence of movement, how the radio operator leaned forward to speak, how the mortar lead paused between rounds to listen for impact, how the RPG gunner shifted his weight before exposing his shoulder. She didn't rush. Rushing was how you missed. Missing was how you died. Down in the valley, Hale's team fought to hold the line. Up in the snow pocket, The quiet specialist waited for the exact sequence that would collapse the siege like a tent losing its poles. The first shot was almost gentle. A controlled squeeze, recoil absorbed into snow, sound swallowed by the valley's bigger violence. The round crossed the bright air and struck the enemy radio operator in the upper chest as he leaned to transmit. He dropped hard, antenna snapping down, his hands still curled as if gripping invisible signal. The effect wasn't dramatic, no explosion, but the battlefield's rhythm changed instantly. The enemy's coordination stuttered. Hands rose in frantic signals. Heads turned. The commander's structure took a hit. The second shot came after measured pause. The mortar lead was mid-adjustment, listening for impact, mouth opening to call a correction. The round took him and folded him sideways against the rock. The next mortar rounds landed wide, drifting off pattern. Confusion replaced precision. The third shot found the RPG gunner just as he began to shoulder the tube. He crumpled, the tube rolling off his shoulder and thumping into snow. The assistant froze, violence interrupted by uncertainty. He looked around, suddenly aware that the air itself had become dangerous. Below, Hale felt the shift like pressure easing off his ribs. Enemy fire was less synchronized, less confident. The Khrushchev gun still barked, but its bursts were ragged, searching. Hale raised his hand, chopped it down, and his men moved Reed into a micro-ridge shadow, dragging him with controlled urgency. Then came the shot that broke the siege. She didn't take it because it looked satisfying. She took it because it was structural. The enemy field commander was tucked in a protected nook, directing timing and restraint. He didn't expose much, just enough to watch, to gesture, to keep the plan tight. When he leaned forward to look down the valley, she took him. The round hit, and the commander collapsed in a way that made the men around him hesitate. Not from grief, from sudden absence of direction. The encirclement stalled. The seam opened. Enemy elements fired blindly for a moment, trying to drown the unknown shooter in volume. Then the enemy adapted. A drone launched, buzzing across the sky, trying to trace the direction of the muzzle report and snow disturbance. Two climbers, assault scouts, began flanking up her side of the ridge, using rocks and folds to close distance. A heavier weapon repositioned, sending search fire into likely Overwatch pockets, snow exploding in sharp puffs near her position. Her constraints tightened. Ammo was limited. Every shot had to matter. Her position was at risk. Her optic threatened to fog again from exertion and temperature shift. Fear pressed in, familiar and cold. Function pushed back. She changed cadence. Fewer shots, longer pauses, using predictability as a weapon. When one of the climbers paused to signal, she put a round through his chest. His partner dropped flat, suddenly alone, suddenly unsure. She slid into a secondary snow depression, only a few feet, but enough to break line of sight and confuse the drone's search pattern. The search fire raked her old pocket, chewing up snow where she'd been. Below, Hale exploited the opening like the professional he was. One team laid suppressive fire, not wild, but controlled, to keep heads down. Another dragged Reed and the tech case toward the extraction route, moving only during enemy confusion and mortar misfires. The enemy tried a final regain. They attempted to re-establish Overwatch, bringing the Ridge sniper back into play, and pushing a close assault to force the pinned unit into a final clustered target. She saw the Khrushchev gun's new angle and realized it had become the last anchor holding enemy suppression together. She made a short relocate, improvised, risky, sliding to a side angle that exposed the gun's flank. The gun leader was shouting, trying to rebuild discipline, trying to make the fight obey the old plan. One shot, the leader dropped. The gun's rhythm collapsed into scattered, ineffective bursts. And then, through the wind and the lingering thumps, she heard a different sound. Rota thunder. Extraction. Hale used smoke and terrain timing, moving his team in tight bursts toward the pickup point. She provided overwatch until the last man cleared. The enemy, stripped of coordination, fired in frustration rather than plan. Then, in her scope, she saw a figure near an enemy position, someone not armed like the rest, moving stiffly, as if directed by threat. A coerced local guide. Maybe. A hostage used as a shield. She held fire. She waited for a clean shot. Restraint, even when time screamed. When the moment came, she took the armed man behind the coerced figure instead. Clean, precise, and the hostage stumbled free into the snow. The bird lifted. The valley shrank beneath them. The siege ended not with a roar, but with a quiet removal of the right pieces from the board. Back at the forward post, the team looked like men who had crawled out of a story they weren't sure they'd survive. Reed lay on a cot, pale but breathing, wrapped in blankets that smelled like old canvas and rescue. The tech team clutched the hard case like it might still explode. Everyone's faces were raw from wind and glare. The debrief wasn't theatrical. It rarely was. It was a table, a map, some water bottles, and the hard truth written in small details. Hale reconstructed the siege with a finger on the map. "Jam a mast here," he said. "Line of sight to the valley route. They weren't just trying to kill us. They wanted us deaf and predictable." He traced the mortar bracketing points. "Pre-registered," he added, jaw tight. They planned it, and the drone confirms they wanted footage. They wanted a daylight victory they could sell. The tech lead opened the hard case and showed the module. "This isn't just sensor logs," he said quietly. "It carries intercept keys and network proof. If they got it, they could blind the region for weeks. Make every team out here walk into darkness." Enemy motives sat heavy in the room. Steal the module, blind the network, and take a propaganda win by breaking a top-tier unit in bright snow daylight. They'd been competent, intentional, close to succeeding. Hale looked toward the quiet specialist. She stood near the wall, sleeves down, hands still, listening without seeking attention. Hale spoke without melodrama, because melodrama was how you lied to yourself. "I dismissed you," he said. Not loudly, not as a confession for applause, just as a fact. "I let my team treat you like an accessory." A pause. "I was wrong." No one laughed. No one shifted uncomfortably. Respect in that room was heavy and quiet, the way it should be. The specialist's gaze lowered for a moment, not in shame, in memory. Later, outside, sunlight hit the snow so hard it hurt. Rotor wash still hung in the air in faint spirals, as if the mountain hadn't finished letting them go. Hale approached her near the landing zone where the fight had finally released its grip. Up close, he saw the edge of ink when the wind tugged her sleeve. Not a flashy tattoo, a coordinate grid with a single mark point. A place that meant something. A grave without a headstone. A promise. He didn't ask. He didn't pry. Some things weren't his to take. Instead, he did the one thing that mattered. He raised his hand and saluted. Not for rank, not for optics, not for tradition. For earned respect. For restraint. For competence under pressure. For carrying quiet grief into violent work and still doing what needed doing. She returned the salute, small and precise. Then she pulled her sleeve back down over the ink, sealing the past beneath fabric the way she always did. The snowfield beyond them was calm again, sunlit and indifferent. But the meaning remained. In a world that loved loud heroes, the mountain had been saved by someone who moved like a shadow, spoke like a whisper, and kept a map of loss under her sleeve, so she would never forget what silence cost, and what it could still protect.